Welcome to the Quiet Hours. You can get new episodes a week early and ad-free by becoming a subscriber. Just follow the links in the episode description. Before we begin our story tonight, take a moment to settle yourself. Find the most comfortable position you can, maybe on your back or curled slightly to one side. Let your shoulders sink a little deeper into the pillow. Allow your hands to rest wherever they naturally fall. Now take a slow breath in through your nose. Hold it softly for a heartbeat, and let it drift out again through your mouth. There's nothing to do now, nowhere to be. The day is finished and the night has taken over its keeping. If you notice any small tightness in your jaw, your neck, your chest, breathe into it gently as though you're smoothing the creases from a sheet. The light around you grows dimmer in your mind's eye. Imagine it softening to the silvery glow of winter twilight. Snow begins to fall in small, lazy flakes. Not hurried, not cold, just quiet drifting through the air. Each breath you take feels a little slower, a little steadier. Your body knows what to do. It's already beginning to rest. You might picture a small cottage in a quiet village, its windows warm against the soft hush of snow. Somewhere inside, a kettle hums, and a woman prepares for a journey of kindness, one that will unfold slowly, gently, like snow settling on rooftops. Keep breathing. In and out, the world outside fades to stillness, and your mind begins to follow the rhythm of the falling snow. When you're ready, let the story of the snow post begin, and allow its calm to carry you wherever your dreams wish to wander tonight. The train slowed as it curved through the white hills, its windows fogged with warmth and the breath of sleepy passengers. Outside, the world was wrapped in snow, soft and endless, muting the edges of everything. Fields lay still beneath a pale sky, and the hedgerows wore crowns of frost. Margaret watched it all in silence, her gloved hands folded neatly on her lap. It had been 20 years since she'd last come this way. 20 Christmases spent in the city, where snow never seemed to settle and people never seemed to stop. She wasn't sure what had pulled her back this year. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the ache of missing something she couldn't name. The train shuddered and came to a stop at Wickford-on-Fen. The sign looked smaller than she remembered. The letters faded, but still just legible through a dusting of snow. She stepped down carefully, her boots sinking into the thin layer of white. The air smelled of cold iron and chimney smoke. No one else disembarked. The little platform was empty except for a wooden bench, a single lamppost, and a post box painted bright red against the gray. She smiled faintly at the sight of it, still standing, still waiting for letters. Her suitcase wheels squeaked as she pulled them through the snow. The village was just as she remembered, narrow lanes lined with stone cottages, smoke curling from chimneys, and a stillness that felt like time itself had paused. Christmas wreaths hung on doors, their ribbons faded by frost, and fairy lights glowed faintly in a few windows. She stopped outside the bakery. It was different now, newer paint, polished sign above the door that read, "The Fenrise Bakery." But the smell was the same: warm bread, cinnamon, and the faint sweetness of jam. Inside, a bell chimed softly as she entered. The woman behind the counter looked up with a friendly smile. "Afternoon. Bit of weather out there, isn't it?" "Just how I remember it," Margaret said, brushing snow from her coat. "Visiting family?" the baker asked, wrapping a loaf in brown paper. "Not exactly," Margaret replied. "Just visiting the past, I suppose." The baker tilted her head, intrigued but too kind to pry. "Well, you've picked a lovely time for it. The village looks its best in the snow." Margaret nodded. It always did. She paid for her bread and a small room upstairs. The bakery rented them out to travelers now, just as the old butcher's wife once had. The room was simple but clean. White sheets, a window overlooking the street, and a small stove already ticking softly with heat. After settling in, she stood by the window and watched the village. A boy dragged a sled past the fountain, his laughter echoing faintly. Across the lane, a man hung a wreath on his door, humming under his breath. Everything moved with the calm rhythm of a place untouched by hurry. Margaret wrapped herself in a shawl and decided to walk. The snow underfoot gave a soft crunch, the kind that seemed to mark the passing of time in gentle beats. She followed the old path she'd once taken every morning on her post route, past the churchyard, where the stones stood like sleeping figures, and along the row of cottages she'd known by heart. Mrs. Peabody's house, still the same blue shutters. The Jarvis farm gate, still with that stubborn hinge she used to tug open with her hip. Each turn of the lane brought back faces and voices, echoes from winters long ago. When she reached the corner by the post office, she stopped. The building stood quiet, its sign half faded, its windows dusty and dark. The door was locked, and the brass post horn emblem above it had lost its shine. The post office had closed 10 years ago, she remembered. Too small, too slow for modern times. Still standing there in the falling snow, Margaret could almost see her younger self inside, sorting envelopes, stamping dates, greeting familiar faces with a smile. The memory warmed her more than the wool around her shoulders. She reached out and brushed a hand over the door frame, tracing the grooves in the old wood. "Well," she murmured, half to herself, "looks like you've been waiting too." The snow was deepening now, turning the lane into a ribbon of white. She made her way back to the bakery as dusk gathered, windows glowing gold, the air filled with the faint scent of mince pies. Later, in her little room, she sat by the stove with a mug of tea. The only sound was the wind outside and the occasional creak of the old beams settling. Before bed, she looked out the window one last time. Snowflakes drifted slowly past the lamplight, soft as feathers. Down on the street, the red post box stood against the white, still waiting for letters it might never see. Something about it tugged at her. She smiled faintly, turned down the lamp, and let the hush of Wickford-on-Fen carry her into sleep. Margaret rose early, wrapped herself in her thickest cardigan, and opened the window a little. The air that drifted in was sharp, but it smelled wonderfully clean. The church bell chimed somewhere across the village, slow and familiar. She made tea in the small enamel pot by the stove, broke a slice from her loaf, and spread it with jam. The simple act felt almost ceremonial. After breakfast, she buttoned her coat, wound her scarf twice around her neck, and stepped outside. The snow had crusted overnight, crunching lightly beneath her boots. The village was stirring. A few shopkeepers brushing steps, a girl carrying a basket of oranges from the grocer's, laughter muffled behind a scarf. Margaret nodded and smiled as she passed, and though many didn't seem to recognize her, she didn't mind. There was comfort in anonymity, in being both part of a place and outside of its expectations. At the corner of the square, she paused by the old post office again. The small brass handle was iced over, the letter slot taped shut. Someone had scrawled "To Let" on a fading notice in the window. She hesitated, then tried the side gate. It was stiff, but not locked. The yard behind was quiet. An old bicycle leaning against the wall, a scatter of pigeon footprints in the snow. She could see where the roof sloped down into a narrow lean-to, its door half open and hanging crooked on its hinges. Inside, shadows gathered, and the faint smell of dust and old paper drifted out. She hesitated a moment longer, then ducked inside. It was colder there, the air unmoving. Shelves still lined the walls, stacks of yellowed envelopes, bundles of string, a calendar forever frozen on December 2002. A cracked mug sat on the counter. She ran a gloved hand along the counter, tracing the grooves worn smooth by years of work. Beneath the counter, half hidden behind a stack of ledgers, she saw a leather strap peeking out. Faded brown, stiff with age. She knelt carefully, pulling it free. It was an old post bag, the kind they hadn't used in decades. The canvas was still strong, though the buckle had rusted. Across its flap, the faint lettering read, "Royal Mail, Wickford-on-Fen." Margaret's breath caught. She eased the buckle open, brushing away a layer of dust. Inside were envelopes, perhaps a dozen of them, their stamps yellowed, their edges curled. She sat back on her heels, staring at the bundle. "Goodness," she murmured. The topmost envelope was addressed to Mrs. T. Copley, Rose Cottage, Wickford-on-Fen. The date, December 1983. She turned it over. The seal was intact. Another read, Mr. and Mrs. L. Hartley, The Willow House, Fen Road. That one, too, was unopened. And there, her own handwriting on a small Christmas card addressed to Mr. P. Hargreaves, The Old Mill. Her heart gave a small, startled leap. She remembered him vaguely. A widower who'd always had a kind word and a jar of boiled sweets for her when she came by with the post. She'd posted that card herself. How on earth had it ended up undelivered? Margaret closed the flap gently, as though tucking the bag back to sleep. She sat for a while in the stillness, the cold beginning to nip at her toes, the dust motes drifting lazily in the slant of winter light. She should probably leave the letters there, she thought. Hand them in to someone, though who that would be, she wasn't sure. The post office no longer existed, the sorting station miles away. But as she looked at that old bag, the familiar creases in the canvas, the faint scent of ink and winter paper, she felt something warm and restless stir inside her. All those words, written in good faith, never reaching their homes, all those people who'd once waited for them. "It doesn't seem right," she said softly. The thought came to her as simply as breath. Perhaps she could finish what time had forgotten. Just a letter or two, she told herself, just to see. She lifted the bag carefully, slung it over her shoulder, and stepped back out into the cold. Snowflakes drifted down again, slow and lazy. The village bell tolled once, then fell silent. The old post bag, worn and familiar against her shoulder, creaked faintly as she walked. The first address on her list, Rose Cottage, was barely 10 minutes' walk from the post office. The lane curved gently past the churchyard, where frost glittered on every branch and the headstones leaned together as though whispering secrets. She felt the faintest prickle of nerves. She wasn't entirely sure what she'd say, or even if anyone still lived there. When she reached the little cottage, she almost didn't recognize it. The roses were gone, of course. Nothing bloomed in this season, but the gate was the same, still painted blue, though the color had faded to something gentler, like the memory of sky. Margaret hesitated, then knocked. For a moment, there was no sound, only the hush of snow and a robin's quick song. Then footsteps approached, and the door opened a cautious inch. A woman in her 60s peered out. Silver hair pinned neatly, cheeks pink from the fire's warmth. "Yes?" "Good morning," Margaret said, her voice catching slightly in the cold. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. My name's Margaret Hall. I used to be the postmistress here some years ago." "Oh." The woman's eyes brightened. "I remember you. My mother used to chat to you when she came for her pension. I'm Claire." Margaret smiled. "Then you must be Mrs. Copley's daughter." "That's right," Claire said softly. "Mom passed about 5 winters ago." "I'm sorry," Margaret said. She was always such a cheerful soul. Claire smiled at that, and her eyes softened. She was. Margaret unbuttoned the flap of the post bag, fingers trembling slightly. "I found something, you see, in the old post office of all places. It must have been left behind for years, and I think it's yours." She held out the envelope. Claire took it carefully, studying the faded writing. "Oh," she whispered. "That's my father's hand. He was still working in Manchester then." The woman turned the letter over as though unsure whether to open it. "He must have written this just before he died." The two women stood quietly together, the snow falling thick and slow around them. Then Claire smiled, a small, grateful curve of the mouth. "Thank you," she said. "It's strange, isn't it, how things find their way back after so long." When she turned to leave, Claire pressed a small sprig of holly into her hand. "For your coat," she said. "It suits the season." Margaret walked on, the holly pinned to her lapel like a badge of belonging. The next house, the willow house, lay at the far end of the lane. Smoke curled from its chimney, and a snowman leaned slightly in the garden, his carrot nose pointing toward the road. A man in his 70s opened the door before she could knock. "Morning," he said, friendly and brisk. "Can I help you?" "I hope so," Margaret said, smiling. "I've a letter addressed to this house from some time ago." He blinked, took the envelope, and squinted at it. "Well, I'll be my brother's handwriting. He moved to Canada in the 80s. Haven't heard from him in ages." Margaret chuckled softly. "Then it's traveled a rather roundabout way to reach you." He gestured toward the door. "Would you like to come in for a cup of tea?" Thank you, but I've a few more to deliver, she said gently. Another time, perhaps. By the time she turned back toward the square, the light was fading. Snow glowed blue in the quiet, and lamps flickered on in windows, small squares of gold against the dusk. She could feel a warmth inside her that had nothing to do with the layers she wore, a quiet satisfaction, the kind that hums in your chest after a day spent doing something that matters, even if no one else quite sees it. Back in her little room, she hung the old post bag by the door and set her boots by the stove. She made herself tea, then took out one of the remaining envelopes, the one with her own handwriting, the one meant for Mr. Hargreaves. She held it over the firelight and smiled. Tomorrow, she murmured. The next morning dawned silver gray, the kind of light that seems to have no clear source, just a steady glow diffused through the clouds. Margaret woke early, made her tea, and watched the snow drifting past the window, each flake slow and deliberate like ash from a quiet fire. The village was still half asleep. Only the milkman's van hummed faintly along the high street. Margaret dressed warmly, looping her scarf twice, and set out along the road that led to the river. The snow there was deeper, muffling every step. The hedgerows bowed under its weight, and the air smelled faintly of wet earth and cold water. When she reached the bridge, she paused. The river ran dark and slow beneath the ice, whispering around the reeds. The old mill stood on the far bank, its wheel long still, its roof thick with snow. Smoke drifted faintly from the chimney, a surprise since she hadn't expected anyone to live there anymore. She crossed the bridge and followed the track to the door. For a moment she hesitated. The world around her was so silent it felt almost sacred. Then she knocked twice, gently, as though not to disturb the peace. After a pause, the door opened. A man stood there, middle-aged perhaps, with a thick jumper and hair just beginning to turn silver. His eyes were kind, curious. "Good morning," he said. "Can I help you?" "I hope so," Margaret said, smiling despite her nerves. "I used to be the postmistress here years ago. I found an old letter at the post office, and it's addressed to this house, to a Mr. Hargreaves." The man's face softened. "That would have been my grandfather," he said quietly. "Did you know him?" Margaret nodded. "A little. He used to come into the post office from time to time. He was a good man." He stepped aside. "Would you like to come in out of the cold?" She hesitated, then nodded, brushing the snow from her coat. Inside, the mill was warm and faintly damp, the scent of wood smoke mingling with the faint, comforting smell of flour. The wheel outside creaked softly with the river's slow push, though it no longer turned. "I'm Peter," the man said. "I moved back here last year, trying to get the old place running again, bit by bit." "It's beautiful," Margaret said, "and you've kept it much the same." He smiled, then looked down at the envelope in her hand. "Do you mind if I open it?" "Of course not." He slit the envelope carefully with a butter knife, as though afraid to damage the paper. Inside was the card, simple and neat, wishing you warmth this Christmas, and may the new year bring kind weather and kinder days. Peter smiled. "I'm glad you brought it," he said. "Grandfather used to talk about how much the village meant to him, how it was people like you who made it feel like home. For a while, they stood in companionable quiet, listening to the gentle ticking of the stove and the soft hiss of snow against the windows. Peter poured 2 mugs of tea. "It's strange," he said after a moment. "I've been working on repairing the mill, but I wasn't sure it was worth it. Sometimes it feels like I'm chasing something that's already gone. But this," he gestured to the card, "it's like a reminder that things once mattered and maybe still do." Margaret smiled, her hands wrapped around the warm mug. "They do," she said softly. "Sometimes it just takes a little while for the message to arrive." They talked a while longer about the village, the winter, the mill's slow work of restoration. When she rose to leave, Peter insisted on walking her to the bridge. "Thank you," he said as they paused at the gate, "for bringing a bit of the past home." Margaret smiled. "It was never lost," she said, "just waiting for the right hands to find it." As she crossed the bridge, she glanced back once. Peter stood by the mill door, watching the river. For the first time in years, she thought she saw the faintest movement in the great wheel, just a slow, hesitant turn, like something remembering how to begin again. The days that followed were calm and snow-bright. The village grew softer around the edges, roofs heavy with white, every hedge trimmed in frost. The bakery's windows fogged with warmth, and the church bells rang more often now, practicing carols for Christmas Eve. Margaret felt a kind of lightness as she walked through the lanes each morning. She still carried the old post bag, though it was empty now. She delivered every letter but one, a single envelope she'd tucked into the inside pocket of her coat. This one wasn't old, nor yellowed with time. The paper was new, the ink still dark and clean. It was hers. After visiting Peter at the mill, she'd come home that evening and sat at her little table by the window. Outside, the snow had fallen thick and slow, coating the world in stillness. Inside, she lit a single candle and begun to write. "Dear Peter, it was a pleasure to meet you and to see the mill again. I hadn't realized how much I miss the rhythm of the village, or how much meaning there can be in something as small as a letter finding its way home. Thank you for the tea, and for reminding me that time doesn't only move forward. It circles back, sometimes gently enough to heal what was left undone. Wishing you peace this Christmas and luck with your work. I hope the wheel turns steady before the spring." She'd signed it, folded it neatly, and slipped it into an envelope. No stamp, no official markings, just his name and the old mill. For 2 days, she'd kept it in her pocket, waiting for the right moment. On Christmas Eve morning, she woke to a sky blushing pale gold. The world outside was hushed, the kind of hush that belongs to both dawn and snowfall. She dressed warmly, took the envelope, and set out. When she reached the bridge, the sun had just cleared the horizon, turning the river to liquid silver. The mill looked almost enchanted, the frost along its roof catching the first light. Peter was outside, stacking logs. He straightened when he saw her. "Morning," he said, surprised. "You're out early." So are you, she said with a smile. It's Christmas Eve. You should be resting. He laughed softly. Habit. The mill never quite lets me sleep late. Margaret reached into her pocket and drew out the envelope. I've brought something for you. He took it gently, reading the name on the front. You didn't have to. I wanted to, she said simply. A small return delivery. He smiled then, that quiet, grateful sort of smile that doesn't quite reach words. Thank you, he said. Would you come in for tea? She hesitated, then nodded, just for a little while. Inside, the stove was glowing, the scent of cinnamon and pine hanging in the air. A small tree stood in the corner, sparsely decorated, a few handmade ornaments, ribbons of old paper. Peter poured tea, and they sat together at the small table, steam curling between them. Do you know, he said, since you brought that card, it feels as though the mill's begun to wake up. I've fixed a few gears, and I heard the old wheel move last night. Margaret smiled. Then the water's answering you. It just needed reminding of its purpose. They talked until the kettle ran out of steam, of winters past, and the odd, quiet comfort of small traditions. Outside, the day brightened, sunlight glinting off the river. When she finally stood to leave, Peter followed her to the door. You've given me more than a letter, you know, he said. You've brought something back that I didn't know was missing. Margaret smiled softly. Then we're even, she said, because you've done the same for me. She stepped back into the snow, pulling her scarf close. As she walked through the village, bells began to ring, bright and steady, echoing across the rooftops. Families moved in the streets, laughter rising with the smoke from their chimneys. The whole world seemed briefly aglow with kindness. When she reached her little room above the bakery, she made herself tea, lit the candle by the window, and watched the snow fall. Across the fields, she could just see the faint outline of the mill, the wheel turning now and then, slow and sure. She smiled. Outside, a robin landed on her sill. Feathers puffed against the cold. Margaret leaned closer, whispering, all delivered. And for the first time in a long while, she felt entirely at peace, as though every word she'd ever sent into the world had finally found its way home.